Hey there, kerbonauts! This is Dauntless Sam, and welcome back to Reach for the Stars in Kerbal Space Program version 0.23. And as you can see, here is the Kerbal system. This is what we're going to be exploring in this series. You can see each one of these dots is a planet that is orbiting Kerbal, the star in the middle of the Kerbal system. And this is the little tiny speck of space that we've explored so far. In episode 3, we flew past the moon. Didn't land there, but we did actually make it out to the moon and back. And today, we'll be flying all the way out to Minmus, which is a little bit harder to catch, because you can see it's at an odd orbit, a slightly more eccentric orbit. It's a much smaller target than the moon. So here we are. We're going to go to our launch vehicle and fly it up to Minmus. So as you can see, I did a slight modification to our extra science vehicle. I realized that these decouplers have a lot of force and will launch it and probably break it. So if we launched it down here, just launch the side and smash into the ground immediately. So I added a parachute that should deploy when I hit the launch, or the decouple button. So let's test this first and hope that it works, but if not, it's not a waste of time. Oh, it looks much better. Why did it drop it? Why did it drop it? Well, we tried. We will move on and just launch. Here we go, launching from Minmus in 3, 2, 1, launch. Solid rocket boosters are firing right away. I have the liquid rockets at 0% throttle because we're going pretty fast already. We do not need any more thrust at this thick of an atmosphere. Once we get up to about 10,000 meters, the atmosphere will be a little bit thinner and we can put a little bit more energy into it. But right now, we're just fighting all the air at this speed. We'll be bringing up the liquid rockets just before the solid rockets run out. So bring up that throttle. The solid rocket boosters are away, and we are slowing down ever so slightly because of the weight of the rocket and the atmosphere that we're pushing through. Though now the atmosphere is thin enough that we are accelerating again, that we are burning through quite a bit of fuel. And once we hit 10,000 meters, we'll start to turn over and start to pull into an orbit. We have to make sure we don't do it too quickly or else we might flip the rocket. There we go. We are at 20,000 meters and rising. Need to make sure that we don't get too high on our apoaps, because then we'd just be wasting fuel if we're just going really high up but not gaining any speed to get into orbit. I think we can pull back our throttle a bit, bring the spacecraft over a bit more, though this might be a bit aggressive. Trying to keep that time to apoaps under a minute, but we'd be pushing through too much atmosphere if I keep the apoaps low enough that we stay close to it. We're just about out of fuel on this stage, so we'll be dropping it in the near future. Our apoaps is now above the atmosphere, so we're going to cut our engines and hope we don't lose too much. Actually, we'll give it a little bit of throttle so we don't lose altitude. Dropping away the stage, sliding out with this next stage. It's very underpowered for how much weight we've got on top of this thing. If I really wanted to, I could activate these engines and transfer fuel back into them. But that would be slightly more difficult and complicated, and more likely things would go wrong. So we're just going to trust that this stage will keep us going in the right direction. In the right direction. There we go. Hopefully that doesn't wobble around too much. And good, we are getting closer to our apoapse right now. Because we don't have much throttle at the moment. Once we get within a minute, I'm going to bring up the throttle a bit more. Within a minute, we are now in space. 70,000 meters out of the atmosphere. Our time to apoapse is still going down. We're going to bring up the throttle even more. And it looks like our time to apoapse is staying right about the same. Oh, still going down a bit. A little more throttle. There we go. It's going up ever so slightly. Now, bring ourselves back to the 90-degree horizontal. As we orbit, we rotate in relation to the planet. So we need to make sure we're horizontal to the ground in order to get the most out of our burn. And it looks like we are burning a little too aggressively now. We're pulling our way from our apoapse, so we'll drop the throttle back. Save some fuel, because we don't want to raise our apoapse even higher. Because there's this little thing called the Oberth effect, where the closer you are to the object you're orbiting, if you dump your fuel in a lower orbit, it means you don't have to carry it out to a higher orbit and then burn. So if you get rid of all the extra weight you have down here to lower altitude and create that, transfer it to thrust, you won't have to move as much out to the higher orbit where it takes more energy to get there. We did bring our time to apoapse down some more. We're going to apply a little bit more throttle. We're pulling away again. Still pulling away. Doesn't take much thrust here. Though we are getting close. I think we'll cut the throttle, time warp a little bit closer to our time to apoapse, and then give it quite a bit more throttle. That way we don't have to burn at a low throttle rating for such a long time. Oh, and we do have a periapse. It's not out of the atmosphere yet, but we're getting there. 50,000, 60,000, 70, there we go. We are out of the atmosphere. Though I think I want to bring this apoapse up a bit so we can time warp around a little bit better. We've still got plenty of fuel in this section of the rocket, though we may need to drop that because it's very hard to maneuver this thing with all the extra weight on the back end of the spacecraft. Let's see, drop down the time warp. Start to swing this spacecraft back around so we can bring our periapse up to just over 100 just over 100 kilometers. Oh, we overshot. Was not paying attention. As you can see, the nav ball, that's how I'm tracking on the map view. Loading in, pointing completely the wrong direction. Though this orbital insertion was much better than some of my previous attempts. And there we go. Using the gimbling of the engine to help arrest the movement of the spacecraft. And just over 100 kilometers and 106 kilometers. So that's not a bad orbit. It's very far away from Minmus. And we're going to set that as a target. Make ourselves a maneuver node, which helps us plan out how we're going to burn to Minmus. Now, it's best to burn at these ascending and descending nodes, because then you don't have to do a plane change to correct for the weird orbit. As you can see, the moon, which is this white line, is a flat orbit in relation to how we're rotating around Kerbin. But you can see that Minmus is doing this weird, not flat with the plane of the solar system. So if we want to correct for that, it takes even more fuel. But if we hit where it lines up with our orbit, we don't have to correct for that, or at least nearly as much. Looks as though we are not going to get it on this one. Then we can drag the node around. See if we get it to this. Still doesn't look good. Oh, there we go. It's going to take 911 meters per second of delta V, which is the amount of thrust we get out of our fuel, to get a Minmus encounter, and a pretty far away one at that. But we can correct for that out here, and we won't be going very quickly, so it won't be much of a thrust correction. So it looks like that's going to be our best shot at a quick trajectory out to Minmus. So we're going to line up with this little node here, and that's the direction we need to burn once we get around to this point in the orbit. And we are lined up. We will time accelerate around to this node. Unfortunately, we needed to get up to 120 kilometers to be able to warp a little bit faster, but it won't take us too long now. We're going at 50 times acceleration, and it's only 12 minutes away, so. Now this says we're going to take a minute to burn out there. So it means I should probably start burning at about 30 seconds from the maneuver node. And you can see this information down here in this corner. The estimated burn is how long we're going to take to burn with the amount of thrust that I have available right now. And this node in 40 seconds here is how long it's going to be until I get to this point. So once this says 30, I should begin to burn. Because that way it'll be 30 seconds on this side of the node and 30 seconds on this side of the node. And we just lost fuel there. That was unfortunate. But we do have this next stage. We did lose some of our weight, but unfortunately that smaller engine gives us less thrust, though it is more efficient. So our estimated burn went up, but we're on this side, on the far side of our node. So our burn's going to be a little weird. So let's see if we can get some physical time acceleration here without breaking the rocket. Physical time acceleration makes it so you can burn at the same time as you're warping through time a little bit faster. So we're at 2 times. which will make our next minute and 40-second burn a little bit more bearable. But the problem with physical time acceleration is that it can break your rocket quite easily. So you have to be very careful. Now, as we get further and further out, the apoaps will rise faster and faster, so we have to be careful. Once we get past the lunar orbit in this system, the apoaps rises quite quickly. So it seems we're getting a little bit off of our trajectory here, but we're getting very close to the amount of thrust we need. We just need 100 meters per second to go. As you can see, this is rising quicker and quicker. We are losing weight, but not that much to warrant this acceleration here. Though unfortunately we ran out of fuel in this rocket, so we've got to drop it. Drop that. Fire those engines. But it won't take us very long, because we have two engines firing now, and they've got the same amount of fuel each as the previous stage. That insertion stage was relatively underpowered in comparison to the spacecraft. Now, trying to stay on this node, since we are after our node, it made it so this moved. Oh, and we just had a tiny little blip of an orbit there. So we're going to get rid of this maneuver node, flip our spacecraft around, and see if we can get that encounter back. There we go. So we have a Minmus encounter with a periaps of 1,157 or 8 kilometers, which is quite far away, but we should be able to time warp out there and correct it when we're so far away from Minmus. It won't take much of a velocity change to bring that down. See, you can see our orbit in relation to Kerbin is only 50 meters per second. So it's going to take us a while to get out to this apoaps, where we're pretty much going to be stationary. Yeah, we made it under 30 meters per second. So we're going to warp around just a little bit closer to Minmus here. So we can do a correction. And we are in Minmus's sphere of influence. Now we just have to slow down our orbit in relation to Minmus on this node here, and hopefully bring that down. Now we're down to 150 meters per second. Cut about half of our velocity in relation to Minmus. This is a very odd orbit, though. Getting down to we can bring our orbit back once we get to periaps. We can make it an actual orbit, though it's not a very clean orbit in relation to the planet Kerbin. But it's an orbit nonetheless. Here we are, kill some more velocity, and we have an orbit. Now let's clean this orbit up a bit. Add a maneuver. Will this fix it? And this is what I mean by a plane change. Fortunately, because Minmus is such a small body, it doesn't take very much fuel to do this plane change. Now let's find our node, line it up, time warp around to the node itself. It's only going to be a 6-second burn. See, that flattens out our orbit, though it does take quite a lot of delta V in comparison to other maneuvers that you can do. That's why it's a whole lot easier, if you can, to do plane changes before you reach the body that you're trying to orbit. But that's all we have time for today. Next episode, we're going to land on Minmus and hopefully bring it back home. Well, not Minmus back home, but the spacecraft and all of the science that is on Minmus back home. If you liked the episode, please do like the episode. If you want to see more videos like this, feel free to click the subscribe button. And if you think anyone else would like this video, don't be afraid to share it. This is Dauntless Sam. Thanks for watching.